Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sixth episode of the Opposite Thought of this program. I would like to introduce my guests for today's episode. Uh, our first guest is a spiritual animal and plant lover, as she introduces herself, Solin from Canada. And our other guest is a moral philosopher, animal rights activist, and president of Effective Altruism Belgium, Stin Brewers.
Hello, glad to be here.
So happy to have you here with me for this episode. I'm gonna start with the main question about this episode. The question is nature really beautiful? I'm gonna start with Stin. What do you think about this question? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks. If I would judge nature, I would say it's cruel, terrible. Basically, it's kind of a failed state. Like if you have a government that is not succeeding in guaranteeing the flourishing of its citizens, basically that's what's happening in nature with all the diseases and hunger, starvation. Most of the animals have very short lives, 99% of the lives. Yeah, short lives, cruel deaths. And in that sense, I'm worried that suffering trumps in nature.
So you basically think that it's not beautiful. I'm gonna move to Solin now. What's your answer regarding this?
I can't disagree. I'm not here to say that nature is not cruel or nature doesn't, or like, I'm not disagreeing with anything that he said. These are facts, actually, and we see them on a normal daily basis. What I believe is that it's your thought and you have the option to decide or to look at it either in each way. You have the option to see that side, that it's actually cruel and there's death and nature is not very pleasant, or you can look at it from the side that I see, which is no, nature is beautiful. It has a lot of things to offer for us, has a beautiful life, has everything that our human body needs, not just as humans. Like if you think of all creatures, basically, it has anything and everything that any creature needs to survive. But yeah, of course, there's death on the other side.
Yeah. So as you said, Solin, so from your answer, you say that it depends on your perspective. You can look at it from different sides. I'm gonna start with the first question with you. If you were in the position of the prey being eaten alive from a group of hyenas or wild dogs, for example, would you still say that nature is beautiful?
The moment that I'm being eaten, of course not. Like definitely not. I won't be feeling like, oh yeah, life is beautiful, life is amazing. That's not how it works, you know. Like if you're in a position that you're being tortured or being eaten alive, this is not a very pleasant feeling. But again, I live in the 21st century right now. I have walls around me. I'm safe. I'm in a place where I'm not being eaten alive. So why do I need to think about that side? Even though, yes, I can see the world from the perspective of the parade, which is being, or any type of animal, still humans too. Like sometimes they are being eaten alive. Even if I want to think from that perspective, yeah, nature is cruel. Nature can be cruel because, or survival is cruel basically, because it just needs something to feed on. And that's kind of not fair, but it's fair in a way, you know, because like this is how it has been working.
So you mentioned that you're currently in a house with walls and all this protection. Why do you need to protect yourself from nature if it's not that cruel and if it's beautiful as you say sometimes? Like, can you imagine yourself sleeping for one night in nature in the forest, for example, with all this danger?
No, I hear you. Of course, like that must be dangerous. And that's survival. Like wherever you are, there are going to be animals that will interact with you or wants to feed on you, or other reasons. Let's say rain, hurricanes, volcanoes, whatever, any other natural disasters. This will always be a possibility. But what I'm thinking is, I'm not in those kind of places right now. And even if I was, like the early humans were in those kind of situations, and they had to deal, they had to survive, they had to walk the whole earth, they had to build things, they had to sleep in caves, they had to do that. But I don't live in that timeline right now. I'm here right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes, Solin. Thanks for your answer. Sten, you heard what Solin said. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, for me, I'm too worried that it's too much an positive, optimistic perspective on the issue. What I try to do is basically consider the interests, the preferences of, let's say, the wild animals. Now, the basic problem in nature is the high reproduction rates of animals. So if you look at populations, the human population is basically very unique because for each adult, you have roughly one offspring, one baby, one child. Even in the most extreme cases of extreme poverty, you have, let's say, 6 children, and 4 out of 6 survive in extreme poverty. Now, if you look in nature, the basic thing is, if you walk in the park, you hear a bird whistling. Now you can know that for every bird that you hear whistling, that's nice and sunny and so on. But there are, let's say, 9 brothers and sisters of that bird that you didn't see, because right after they hatched, they came out of the eggs, they starved to death. They got parasites, they got diseases, they got birds of prey eating them alive, basically. Not stunning them first and then eating them, but basically simply catching them. So these 9 brothers and sisters, they had a short, cruel life with a large part of that life was the death part and the suffering from dying. Now you can think about what is a life look like if it's so short, shorter than your expected life, your life expectancy. 9 out of 10 birds, children die in the park. That's orders of magnitude higher than with humans in extreme poverty. And then you can look at other species with, let's say, frogs. That's more than 99% of the little frogs, newborn frogs, and with insects and with the salmon and you name it. A lot of newborn fish, and they all have very short lives. And yeah, that's basically what happens is, like, people are worried, for example, with human overpopulation, like you have too many children and then you have a population boom and a crash. Actually, humans are for the moment, the only population that does not face this kind of extreme overpopulation growth. But in nature, you see it every season. In springtime, you have the 10 mice, 10 young birds and so on. The population increases tenfold and then drops tenfold again. So every springtime you have this huge jumps and up and down in the population size. And you don't see those little animals, the little squirrels and hedgehogs that don't survive because they are eaten, they disappear. You only see the survivors, the healthy, the happy animals. And that's a bit survivorship bias, so to speak. Like, I can walk around here and I see, life's perfect. I don't see anyone dying there. Of course, I don't see the wars. I don't see the hospitals. Yeah, okay, logic that I don't see them. That I think life is beautiful, but that's a bit misleading.
Yes, then thank you for your answer. So I can tell that you worry about suffering so much, and people wonder, like, why do you worry about suffering a lot? Like, why do you think that pain outweighs the pleasure in life? Some say that pain is subjective. It depends on the person who's experiencing that pain. How do you explain that?
Well, the subjective part is indeed the case, and I'm consider myself an effective altruist. So effective means that I want to choose the means that are effective reaching my ends, and the ends in this case are doing the things that other individuals want, satisfying the preferences of others. And for example, wild animals, they do have preferences, preferences for not suffering. And these preferences, of course, they are subjective. These are the preferences of the birds themselves. They have these feelings, and they want things. They don't want to be killed. They don't want starvation. They do want food and a partner and everything that they like. In philosophy, there's a kind of discussion with negative utilitarianism. They focus on the suffering side, like suffering is always worse than happiness. I'm not really sure if that's always the case. I mean, I'm a bit uncertain about what moral philosophy is the correct one. But if you do some thought experiments, like let's say today, one day of extreme torture, the most extreme torture that you can possibly feel. In return, tomorrow you have the most extreme blissful experience that you can possibly feel. Would you do it? Would you choose for that? I would be a bit reluctant. I mean, I would start to think that this one day of suffering is worse than one day of bliss. Now I could be wrong, of course. Basically, we should ask the animals in the wild to know whether what they prefer. But to put on the safe side, it's always easier also to decrease pain instead of when someone is miserable, relieving their suffering by giving them food or helping them. That's often easier than improving someone who is already happy. If you're already happy and now I'm going to try to increase your happiness, I mean, I really have to think hard. So what can I do? But if you're in the worst of position, if you're extreme suffering, then it's often much easier to improve their welfare. If you're in the worst of position, give them a little bit of food and they're already happy. I mean, the poorest person, you can give them $1 and they're already happy. The super rich person, you have to give them quite a lot before they start to be more happy. So that's why focusing on the worst of positions, the persons, the wild animals that suffer the most is, I think the most effective.
Yeah, thank you for your answers, Stan. So, Solin, you've heard what Stan stated. In other words, in order to make someone happy, maybe you need to do a lot, and to cause suffering to others, it's so easy to do that. Plus, there is long-term mental illness, for example, or some kinds of diseases or illnesses that remain for a long time, but there's no long-term happiness. How do you respond to that? What do you think about this?
There's no long-term suffering too, if you choose not to. Like there's no forever state in anything. Not anything that we've known as humans. Anything that hunger is not a long stay. After you eat, you're done. After you digest, you're hungry again. When you're happy, you get sad, you get happy. Like this is what I'm trying to say is that this is not a state that it will always be like that. Like I'm not always thinking, yeah, life is very happy, or nature is very happy, nature is very fair, there's no suffering around. No, it's there. It's basically there. And even the sadness, even the mental illness in most of us, it doesn't mean that we cannot be happy. And it doesn't and the fact that happiness is temporary doesn't mean that you shouldn't long for it, or it's not there. Like if the
Yes,
clock covers it, then it doesn't mean that light was not there. You know what I'm saying?
let me interrupt you here. There are beings with that are terminally ill, which means that it's a long-term suffering.
Okay.
So how do you comment on this? Because before you denied that there's long-term suffering, you said there's no long-term suffering.
You what? Give me an example. Give me like a case.
Stan, do you have any examples regarding this? Diseases, for example.
In the wild, you mean animals in the wild?
In general.
Yeah, as I said earlier, most newborn animals in the wild, when they are born, most of their experiences will be hunger, starvation, a disease, and then a predator attacking them. And for them, it's basically like a terminal illness. If you look at the whole life, it's terminal illness, and then they are eaten by insects or whatever, predators. So it is easy to imagine, if you look at life histories of animals, individual animals, most of their life histories are short, and think about what does it mean if you die prematurely before you can reproduce? What does an average life look like? If I can explain you, this is a human being, and I'll tell you that human being lived 2 years. What can you imagine kind of living circumstances? How would that life look like if I only tell you that it's 2 years? Most likely it's kind of extreme poverty or a disease. And how did it die? Yeah, okay. It's extreme poverty kind of situation. And that's the majority of animals in the wild die prematurely.
Okay.
So, of course, these 9 birds, they are hungry, and then the mother comes feeding them, and that's the only pleasant experience that they have, that's being fed for this one moment, but there's not enough food, and then there is bad weather, or in the park you see the 10 little ducks, the newborn ducks. You do know that only 1 out of those 10 will survive and will become this adult duck swimming there. What happens with the other ones? Of course, you don't see them dying and rotting there on the street. They quickly disappear, but
Yeah, Stan. So I have a question for you. So what do you think, is there anything possible where we can do to improve that or to eliminate this?
well, I'm also a kind of a long-termist, so I'm thinking also about the suffering in the far future. We're only beginning now. I don't have the solution now. I'm not saying like we should now stop predation in the wild and so on. But I do think that we should start doing scientific research to look for effective and safe ways how we can help nature to improve the welfare of wild animals. Now you can say, how can we now effectively help wild animals? Of course, the simple things that we already do is kind of vaccination programs for wild animals. That's already being implemented, and we can move on in the health issues. But that would not be enough, because you still have predation, you still have the high reproduction rate and competition between animals and so on. So we have to think much harder. Now you can say that's impossible to solve. And then it's a bit like you go back in time 1,000 years ago, people dying from all kinds of diseases. They didn't know what bacteria and viruses were, so they couldn't solve the problem. What could they do? Well, the answer for them would be like, just pray. If you're ill, just pray, and that's it. And that doesn't work. Okay, you can't blame them that they did not do anything about all those people dying. The only mistake that they made that you can blame them for is they did not at that moment start doing the medical scientific research. That's only much later in the Renaissance, the 17th century and so on. That's only the period where we started doing medical scientific research. So late, I mean, the ancient Greeks could have done it already and we would have cured cancer. But no, they didn't. So I would say if you look at the far future, think about the wild animals 1,000 years ahead of now. And if we now start doing the scientific research, probably we will find solutions for the next centuries and millennia. That's what we can do now to start doing research.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. I'm gonna move to Solin now. A lot of people from the followers of this page ask, how could something that is based on survival of the fittest or of the strongest be beautiful? Isn't that more like a bloody battlefield? Like, you know, in the wild, in nature in general, in order to survive, you have to fight. If you do not fight, you cannot survive. And the ones who survive are the strong ones. The ones who pay the price are the weak ones. So there's always oppression in nature, no matter what we do. How do you respond to that?
I'm not disagreeing that this is actually a bloody battle in all nature, everywhere. Um, but that still, to me, is not very cruel. Like, I wouldn't say this is beautiful. It's not like I would look at it or look at an animal being teared apart or a human being teared apart and see or think this is beautiful. This is not. But what is beautiful about it is the force of life, the survival, you know, like that, the longing to live, that this, like all creature has it. Humans, just to the smallest bacteria and viruses, this force of life or this consciousness that wants to still be there, wants to live, wants to evolve or become two or become four. Or this is what I think is beautiful about nature. It's not that it's not bloody. It's not that it's not, yeah, the weak gets eaten or the weak gets like go, you know, like it's sometimes it feels like it's not fair, but this is the force of life for any creature. And if you were in that position still, even what your body is made of things that feeds on other things. And if you don't feed it, it will feed on itself. So that's basically like, I can't think that this is cruel. I just think that this is very fascinating.
Yeah, but you know, some people say because it's based on that, because it's built on that, so it's unnecessary and it shouldn't be there because it's at the expense of someone else, you know?
Yeah, I hear you. But I
Yeah.
mean, this is not something that nor you nor me can control. That's the thing. Like, it's not that maybe you become capable. I don't know if humans will at some point become capable of surviving, or not just humans, like all creatures. If we will, I don't know, get our energy from the sun or from the air or from somewhere else, we won't need to consume any other being for us to go on. I don't know if this will happen in the future. It would be lovely, like it would be great. But for now, nor you nor me are capable of changing that fact that we feed on each other and that everything feeds on its, like, it's basically feeding on itself. Nature is just feeding on itself the whole time and appearing as human, appearing as an animal, appearing as a tree. But it's basically doing that constantly. It's not stopping and it's not changing. And whether I think about it this way or not, it's not going to change.
I can agree that you can say the presence of a will to live, for example, that's kind of beautiful, that's remarkable, that's really amazing that there are beings who have this kind of will to live. But the problem is then, look at all these ducklings in the park, these 10 ducklings, they have a will to live. But for 9 of them, this will to live is not satisfied. I mean, it's obstructed, they are killed. I mean, they wanted to keep on living. So I would prefer a world where everyone has the strength, the same will to live and to flourish and and this consciousness, or this conscious experience of happiness and amazing experiences. But yeah, these preferences, they are too much obstructed. And if we can play it smart, so to speak, we can help nature how to satisfy more these kind of preferences of the animals. I mean, nature it's not so efficient that one animal has to eat the other, such that the will to live of only one animal is satisfied because the other needs to be sacrificed. If we care about satisfying the will to live of everyone, I would not come up with the idea like, you know, the efficient way to do this is let's make some animals kill the others and then kill themselves and being eaten by others, and that's so not really.
Unfortunately, Stan, nor you and I are the designers for this. Like, I didn't design it. You didn't design it. It's not that we wished it for it to be like this.
Yeah, that's the problem. There is no designer, or you can say nature as a designer was pretty much blind and did not care about this will to live of its individuals. It's like a government that said, like, I don't care about the flourishing of my citizens. I don't design any political economic system. Let them do whatever they want. And yeah, it's remarkable that still in this environment, that consciousness evolves, for example. That's pretty much like, wow, even an entity, nature, that is not, that cannot see or does not have any intentional design plans or so, even that entity, although being blind, can create consciousness. But then, yeah, the stupid thing is that it creates animals with preferences and knows in advance that these preferences cannot be satisfied because it's the way it's done, it's not really efficient. And that's what you see with humans, for example. We are managing to satisfy our preferences. I mean, our deepest preferences for health and life, and our children to survive, and all these kind of things. We have a very good track record now in doing that, and we're still in an early stage, only 2 centuries basically, that you can see this progress. I mean, yeah, I would say with our intelligence, what we already have done, it's not unlikely that we will succeed in helping nature to do it for the wild animals as well. We only need the research. I mean, we have learned a lot about ecology, about microbiology, all this scientific knowledge that we can use. We've developed vaccines. I mean, nature is blind and did not develop vaccines, but we did.
Well, I mean, it brought you the material that got you to create the vaccine, basically.
Yeah, it forced us also. It brought us the viruses, and like now you have to create the vaccines, and now they create even new viruses, and then they spread it, and then like you've seen what's with the corona crisis.
Okay. That's part of nature. That's part of life. Like, I have a question for you. You were talking about how in the wildlife sometimes they're overpopulating, and then you're talking about the birds that 9 of them die and 1 of them gets to survive. If the 9 of them don't, if the 9 of them survived, actually, how would you expect not to overpopulate, like not humans with all other creatures? How would the nature balance itself other than that? If it wasn't.
Yeah, logically, we do know most animals, they have a high reproductive strategy. So that's an evolutionary strategy. Don't invest much in your children, but create a lot of children, and 1 of them survives, and that's okay. That's the strategy, the reproduction strategy of most animal species in the wild. And in terms of well-being, that's not efficient. I mean, it's so wasteful of all these young children dying. And now you can see with humans, we did something remarkable. We evolved towards a species where, at least in the Western developed world and so on, we have roughly 2 children per parent group. So in that sense, we can stabilize a population where every newborn child will have a long life until reproductive age. And so basically every human can have a child who can have a child who can have a child. And all these children and grandchildren and so on, they can have long, prosperous lives. It's not impossible that we do know how we manage to do that and what's biologically involved in it, not only with contraceptives, but contraceptives are an important part of it. But it's not impossible that we can manage that, let's say with the ducks, that the ducks have only 2 little ducklings, and these 2 little ducklings then become old and they also can get 2 little ducklings. And yeah, instead of all these 10 and 9 out of 10 die, why not transition towards that?
Yeah. So Stan, are you against ducks having babies? That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, not really. I want that the ducks have 2 babies and who can survive. For a pair of parents, 2 children, then you can have a stable population. I want a stable population of ducks in the park. And that would mean it would be impossible if every duck has 10 children, 10 ducklings, because if those 10 also have 10, then you have hundreds, and then you have thousands, and then the park is 10,000.
So that's actually interesting that you see all the cruelty in this nature, and at the same time you're still with the idea of ducks having babies and animals in general having babies.
So I'm not technically speaking.
Yeah.
I'm not technically speaking anti-natalist. So also basically because I do also want to respect the preference for reproduction. So people do not only have a preference for not dying, but they also want to have children. That's also a preference, and I want to satisfy all kinds of preferences. That as long as these preferences are not harmful for others, then of course that's okay. I think it would be nice to also have a future where perhaps we can create such a future where a lot of new children will be born, but all these children have positive lives with mostly positive experiences, and perhaps even with extremely positive experiences. So net positive, much more happiness than suffering. Of course, they have toothache sometimes, I don't know. But in general, they can get married and they have children and they have a happy life and go on holiday. And the same with wild animals, that they can taste nice food and they can have children and they can fly around and play around. And it would be nice if you could create such animals that have such mostly positive lives. From some point of view, you could say that's our the vision for the far future. That it could even be possible that there will be a point in the far future where you have the final last experience of unwanted suffering. So the last experience that someone did not want. It's not even impossible that that you can that such a final unwanted suffering experience is there, and from then on, after that, you only have positive experiences or kind of wanted suffering, like you go on a hike, you have mountain climbing, suffering, okay, but then you reach the mountaintop, yeah. So that kind of suffering, okay, that's still nice. But not the unwanted suffering. There's no logical or there's no law in biology, in chemistry, in physics that says that you should always have unwanted suffering in the world. There's no law in nature that says it. And we are eliminating unwanted suffering experiences with all kind of medicines and so on. We just started for 2 centuries and we have millions of years ahead of us, going to other planets and have there a lot of happy animals.
Yeah, thank you for your answer, Stan. I'm gonna move to Salim now for another question that is asked by many. A nature that creates tornadoes, volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, and other natural disasters that cause a huge destruction with millions of sentient beings affected, killed, dismembered, and injured should definitely be considered cruel. Uh, what do you think of that?
Uh, again, I'm not here to dispute the fact that nature can be cruel. Nature can be cruel, but nature balances itself. That's what I know. It creates anything. First of all, anything that happens, any nature, like nature disasters, usually have something to do with imbalance. Like something happened, like why volcanoes happen, the earth cracked under, or shit just flows out. Uh, Nature just balances itself. Sometimes there's an imbalance in it, and it needs to have something to happen, or sometimes viruses, when there's a virus that spreads, you see like what's going on right now. This is kind of, it feels like nature is just balancing itself. We're overpopulating as humans, as animals, as all creatures. So nature finds the way to balance all of those things every once in a while. Why would I still consider that cruel when it has millions and millions of things that offers me every day? Why would I just look at that side? Yes, it does something cruel, or it does kills millions of life, but it also produces a million of life.
I'm a bit.
Yeah, so you mentioned before that it's an unintelligent design, not an intelligent design.
Not very. No, to be honest, like I wouldn't, if it was up to me, or if it was up to a lot of us, we would think that we could make it better, or we could create a better design to have it not be this way. But I mean, I don't have the answer to that. I don't have the answer or the solution for a perfect nature. I don't. If anybody else is like, I would love to work towards that. I see humanity doing a lot of things to actually end suffering as much as, or not end it. I don't think that's possible still. Eliminate it as much as possible. But that's all I can say about that. Like, it's not that it's not cruel. It's not that it's not that. We have that side, and that side is still there. But what it has to offer for me is a lot more than what it's taken away from me.
So, Solon, I have a question for you. How do you see this state of nature that is in balance? I mean, does balance mean the state that is optimal for welfare of all the animals, or is it simply like you can also say like when everything is dead and nothing moves, then that's balance. Nothing moves. Does that count as a balance, or how do you know that nature strives towards balance?
This is
I don't see that.
Honest, like I'm not saying that I'm a scientist. I didn't go in the fields to discover or to learn to know how all of those things. I only read and I watch documents and I read certain things that sometimes shows every once in a while, every century, let's say, or certain period of time, something happens in nature that just, it kills a lot of people or a lot of humans, or a lot of animals. So to me, it feels like that's balance.
Yeah, but I would say like these are simply natural processes, and I don't see why that's balance or why that's a move towards balance, because these kind of disruptions, they are now already, planet Earth is existing for 4 billion years, and still you have these kind of disruptions. When is the Earth finally in balance? I would say, I mean, still the fires and climate change, even without humans. You have the ice ages, and then you have the forests on fire, and you have population booms and crashes, and these things that they still happen in nature. And even with new viruses, I mean, the coronavirus is a pretty much new virus. I mean, when is nature finally in balance such that we do not have these new viruses and new floods and new diseases, and can it ever go into balance? I mean, when will it stop?
I have no idea when will it stop. Maybe when all kind of life stops. Is that a possibility? Like, if that happens?
Yeah, for me, I would say basically, if you look at thermodynamics, I don't know if you're familiar with the law of entropy and so on. Basically, what you can predict is the final stage of the universe that will be balanced when all stars are burnt out and the planets are evaporated, and I mean everything is at the lowest energy state, maximum entropy, maximum disorder, basically. Nothing useful can be done anymore because, yeah, so it's like everything is a total mess, and everything is dead, of course, and the stars are gone, so of course there's no life anywhere anymore. And then nothing happens, but I mean, that will be the final stage of the universe, and that state will be there for forever, without happening. I mean, you won't see even a star exploding because the stars already are all exploded. So nothing spectacular happening there. That's the final balance state, but of course that's not what we want. That's not a state where we can have flourishing lives. And if you look at nature itself, you can see like, yeah, the forest, that's a kind of balance. I mean, it's an old forest and it's still there for thousands of years or so. But even then, that kind of balance, it's only from our human perspective, basically. I mean, we have a lifespan of 100 years. When we speak about balance, it's typically about things in nature that's happening for 100 years or longer. Also, the size is not, if you look at in the forests, if you look at all the bacteria in the soil, I mean, that's not balance. I mean, they are whirling around and doing everything, and then the fungi in here and there, and a forest, a tree crashes, and suddenly new plants growing. I mean, but if you zoom out from a helicopter and you see the forest, it's still like a peaceful state, like tranquility there in the forests. But if you zoom in again, in within the cells, I mean, there are animals with viruses. These viruses are attacking the cells, and boom, boom. Yeah, it depends on the reference.
So yeah, thank you both for this. Any final comment or question from any of you? One last thing you want to say?
One last thing, perhaps. I basically had, let's say 10 years ago, kind of the vision of Solon. It's kind of ecocentrism, like nature has intrinsic value and ecosystems, the stability, integrity of ecosystems. Biodiversity has an intrinsic value and things like that. But I came back to that point because what basically happened is a kind of a thought experiment. So I can value nature, natural habitats, wild nature. I can value it like a beautiful, with sunset and the animals and so on. It's kind of an aesthetic valuation, for biodiversity, for integrity, stability of this ecosystem. And I also can value the welfare of you, of animals. I mean, so I can value your welfare. Now, the thing is, nature itself, this ecosystem, that's an abstract whole of all kinds of living entities and the environment. Nature itself doesn't care about biodiversity or integrity or naturalness. I mean, this concept of naturalness, that's not known for nature. I mean, nature does not have a consciousness, no conscious experiences, does not experience biodiversity loss. We can see it, biodiversity loss, but the ecosystem itself is not able to feel these things or reflect on those things. On the other hand, when I value your welfare, even if I don't do it, next to me, there's always someone else who does value your welfare, and that is you. You value your own welfare. You do know when your own welfare decreases. You feel it. You don't want that. You have direct experiences of your welfare. That's something that you value yourself. And then I would say, like, okay, I can value the integrity and the biodiversity of nature, and I can value your welfare. But what if those two come into conflict? What should go first? If I say the integrity and the biodiversity of nature goes first, that's kind of arrogant, because basically that's my own preference for integrity, naturalness, and so on. That's my own idea, my own concepts. And I impose them basically then onto you, because I sacrifice your welfare for the integrity of nature. It's a kind of a burning museum dilemma. I can value the Mona Lisa, a beautiful painting in the museum, the Louvre, let's say, but it's burning down. Suppose there's a baby in the museum, and I can decide I can either save the painting or the baby. What should I do? Now I can tell a beautiful story about the Mona Lisa, how it's painted a long time ago by Da Vinci, and how beautiful it is, and aesthetic value is so terrible if it's get lost from humanity and that no one can see the painting anymore. But the Mona Lisa itself, this painting, does not have any preferences, does not care about flames or beauty or aesthetics or, wow, I'm created by Da Vinci with this beautiful touch of paint. I mean, but and the baby, on the other hand, the baby does care about the flames. I mean, does really not feel the flames. Strong preference. If I would save the painting, then I would trump my own preference for aesthetic beauty. I would let that trump above the preferences of the baby for not dying, for not feeling flames and not burning. And that would be pretty arrogant to say, like, actually my preference, my valuation of beautiful painting is more important than my valuation of your welfare. I cannot say that to the baby. And that's when I started to change my mind, let's say 5 years ago or something, starting to think, like, now I want to do what the others really want. I look at nature, I really want to say, this ecosystem, what does this ecosystem want? Not that much, but yeah, this bird, what does this bird want? This bird want food or want health. And I want to satisfy the things that others want, and in an effective way. And then it becomes dangerous to say, like, we should leave nature untouched. Respect the integrity of nature. Don't interfere in nature. Don't do anything about the starving, the dying birds. That would be kind of arrogant, because this kind of hands-off politics, that's my own valuation, my own valuation of biosphere integrity, you can call it, or naturalness, or virginity, or I don't know what kind of words you can say, you can give. But these are my own valuations, and yeah, that's basically I consider it as the most, my biggest moral mistake that I made in the past.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. One final word for you, Soline.
I believe that if you zoom in into anything is in a way cruel or vicious. It's based on survival. Most of the times, yes, that's okay. But if you zoom out, as you said about the forest, like if you zoom out, you just see it there. You just see it peacefully. That's basically what I choose. The corner that I choose to look at life from is that I zoom out from my own body that is fighting and eating on a million of things on a daily basis. I zoom out of that and I still see it as beautiful. I still see it as a force of life. I still see it as balance. You know, it's beautiful. You know, like, and love was never easy. Like, to love nature or to love both sides or anything that has the nature has to offer for you is not an easy thing. To accept it, to accept 100% that this is how it is, this is how it goes, I'm part of it, and something is going to feed on me at some point. I will disappear and I will become a tree or become worms or become something else. That still to me is okay, as long as I use those years that I'm in, that I'm healthy and I'm capable of being alive, as long as I use those for everything that I wish for happiness, for love, for harmony, for having animals, enjoying animals, enjoying all everything that nature has to offer for you. That's kind of what I see.
Anyways, thank you both for accepting to be my guests today for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who's watching. So this is the end of the 6th episode of The Opposite Thought. We hope you had a good time. You heard both views and you have your final decision to analyze and think of this. Thank you again. And this is Laith Malakreem from Bolivia. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.